The restaurant smelled like old money and new secrets, a heady mixture of truffle oil, aged wine, and the kind of cologne that cost more than my monthly rent. I balanced 3 plates on my left arm, the porcelain edges digging into my skin as I navigated between tables draped in white linen that probably cost more to clean than I made in a week. My feet ached in the cheap black flats I'd bought at a discount store, the soles so thin I could feel every crack in the marble floor beneath me. "Table 7 needs water," Marcus hissed as I passed the bar, his eyes darting nervously toward the corner booth. "And for God's sake, Sophia, don't stare." I didn't ask what he meant. In the 3 months I'd worked at Castellanos, I'd learned that some questions were better left unasked. The restaurant attracted a certain clientele, the kind who arrived in black cars with tinted windows, who spoke in low voices and left cash tips that could feed me for a month. The kind who made Marcus's hands shake when he poured their wine, but I needed this job. After my father's death 6 months ago, leaving behind nothing but hospital bills and a 1-bedroom apartment in the worst part of Brooklyn, I couldn't afford pride. My literature degree hung on the wall at home, mocking me every morning as I pulled on this ridiculous uniform. A black dress that was supposed to look elegant, but just made me feel like I was playing dress-up in someone else's life. The evening shift was always the worst. That's when they came. I felt him before I saw him. The temperature in the room seemed to drop, conversations faltering mid-sentence as the front door opened. I was refilling a water glass at table 4 when the shift happened. That subtle change in atmosphere that made my skin prickle with awareness. Everyone in the restaurant suddenly became very interested in their plates. I glanced up, and my breath caught. He moved through the restaurant like he owned it, which, according to kitchen gossip, he probably did. Tall, easily over 6 feet, with dark hair swept back from a face that could have been carved from Carrara marble. His suit was charcoal gray, perfectly tailored to broad shoulders that suggested violence kept barely in check, but it was his eyes that trapped me. Dark, almost black, and utterly cold as they swept the room with the practiced ease of a predator assessing his territory. 2 men flanked him, built like refrigerators in expensive suits, their eyes constantly moving, cataloging exits and threats. One spoke into his wrist, and I realized with a start that he was wearing an earpiece. The maitre d' appeared from nowhere, nearly tripping over himself to escort them to the corner booth. The one that was always kept empty, even on our busiest nights, the one Marcus had warned me about. I turned back to my table, willing my hands to stop shaking as I poured water. This wasn't my business. I was just the waitress. Invisible to men like that. I would keep my head down, do my job, and... "Sophia." Marcus's voice was tight with panic. "Table 7. Now." My stomach dropped. "What?" "No, someone else can." "Antonio called in sick. You're the only one available." His fingers dug into my arm, his face pale. "Just take their order. Don't ask questions. Don't make small talk. And whatever you do, don't what?" But Marcus was already pushing me forward. A leather-bound menu thrust into my trembling hands. The walk to table 7 felt like miles. I could feel eyes on me, not just his, but everyone's. The entire restaurant seemed to be holding its breath, watching to see what would happen to the foolish girl who'd drawn the short straw. Up close, he was even more devastating and terrifying. The scent of his cologne hit me first. Something dark and expensive, cedar and bergamot with an underlying note of danger. He sat with his back to the wall, one arm draped casually over the booth. But there was nothing relaxed about him. Every line of his body spoke of coiled tension, of violence waiting for an excuse. His companions flanked him like silent sentinels, their faces expressionless. "Good evening, gentlemen." My voice came out steadier than I'd expected, though I couldn't quite meet his eyes. "My name is Sophia, and I'll be taking care of you tonight. Can I start you with something to drink?" Silence. I forced myself to look up and immediately wished I hadn't. Those black eyes were fixed on me with an intensity that made my skin burn. Not with attraction, or not just attraction. There was curiosity there, and something else I couldn't name. Something that made me feel like a butterfly pinned to a board. "Sophia." He spoke my name like he was tasting it, his voice deep and accented. Italian, definitely, but smoothed by years of American business. An interesting choice. Greek wisdom for an Irish girl. I blinked. I'm actually half Italian, sir. My mother... I cut myself off, heat flooding my cheeks. Marcus had said no small talk. What can I get you to drink? The corner of his mouth twitched. It wasn't quite a smile, but it transformed his face, making him somehow more dangerous. Half Italian. Then perhaps you can recommend something. What would you drink, Sophia, if you could afford anything on our menu? The question felt like a trap. One of his men, the one with a scar bisecting his left eyebrow, made a low sound that might have been a warning. But the man in the middle, the one who commanded the room without saying a word, simply waited, his dark eyes never leaving my face. I'm not really a wine person, sir. No? He leaned forward slightly, and I caught another wave of that cologne mixed with something else, leather and gunpowder and mint. What are you, then? I'm more of a coffee person, with lots of sugar. The words tumbled out before I could stop them, and I wanted to die. Here I was, standing in front of what was clearly a very dangerous, very powerful man, and I was babbling about coffee like an idiot. But instead of anger, something flickered in those dark eyes. Amusement, maybe, or interest. Coffee with lots of sugar. He repeated my words slowly, like he was memorizing them. A simple pleasure. Honest. He glanced at his companions. We'll have the Barolo, the 2015, and bring the lady coffee, with lots of sugar. Oh, no, I couldn't possibly. It wasn't a request. The words were soft, but they carried the weight of absolute authority. This was a man who didn't ask twice. I nodded quickly, making a note on my pad with trembling fingers. Of course. And for your meal? Whatever the chef recommends. He waved a hand dismissively, then paused. But first, I have a question for you, Sophia. Everything in me screamed to run, but my feet stayed rooted to the marble floor. Yes, sir? He leaned back, his fingers drumming once on the table, a heavy gold ring catching the light. You seem like an intelligent woman. Educated even. What's a girl like you doing working in a place like this? The question caught me off guard. It was too personal, too probing. And yet, there was genuine curiosity in his voice. I needed a job, I said simply. My father, he died. Medical bills. I had to drop out of my master's program. Something shifted in his expression. It was subtle. A slight softening around his eyes, a barely perceptible nod. Like he understood loss. Like maybe, underneath all that power and danger, he was human after all. I'm sorry for your loss. The words were formal, but they sounded sincere. What were you studying? Literature. Victorian novels, specifically. I immediately felt foolish. What did a man like this care about dead British writers? But again, that flicker of interest. Ah, stories of morality and society, good and evil. His smile was sharp. And what did those novels teach you, Sophia? About the world? That things are rarely as simple as they appear. I heard myself say. That the villains often think they're heroes. And that sometimes, the people we're told to fear are just trying to survive, like everyone else. The silence that followed felt heavy, weighted with meaning I didn't understand. His companions exchanged glances. One leaned in, whispering something urgent in rapid Italian. But the man at the center, the one who commanded gravity itself, simply stared at me with those fathomless dark eyes. An interesting perspective. He tilted his head slightly. Tell me something else, Sophia, since you seem to be a woman of unexpected wisdom. This was dangerous territory. Every instinct told me to excuse myself, to run back to the kitchen and hide. But there was something magnetic about him. Something that held me captive even as alarm bells rang in my head. What would you like to know, sir? He smiled then. A real smile that didn't reach his eyes. I'm a businessman. I invest in various enterprises. Let's say I have a competitor who's been making trouble, cutting into my territory, disrespecting agreements we've had in place for years. He spoke casually, like we were discussing the weather. What would you do in my position? How would you handle such a situation? Every server in the restaurant had gone still. I could feel their fear, thick and suffocating. This was a test. It had to be. But of what? I didn't know. My mouth was dry. I don't know anything about business, sir. Humor me. The words were soft, deadly. My mind raced. What did he want to hear? What was the right answer that wouldn't get me, or worse, Marcus hurt? Then I thought of my father. He'd been a financial consultant before the cancer, had taught me about markets and risk assessment while I was growing up. Look at the fundamentals, Soph, he'd always said. Numbers don't lie. If it were me, I said slowly, I'd look at why they're cutting into your territory. Are they offering something you're not? Better prices? Better service? I swallowed hard. Competition usually means there's a gap in the market. Maybe instead of handling them, you could figure out what that gap is and fill it yourself. Make them irrelevant. The silence was absolute. I'd made a terrible mistake. I'd spoken to him like he was a normal person, like this was a normal conversation. I'd forgotten that men like him didn't ask for advice. They gave orders. I should get your drinks, I stammered, backing away. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to. Wait. I froze. He was staring at me like he'd never seen me before, like I'd just said something profound instead of idiotic. His fingers had stopped drumming. His companions had gone very, very still. What's your last name, Sophia? Russo, sir. Russo. He repeated it, something unreadable crossing his face. And your father, what was his name? Antonio Russo. He was a financial consultant before he got sick. The man's jaw tightened. One of his companions leaned in again, whispering urgently, but he waved him away with an impatient gesture. Antonio Russo. His voice had gone quiet, dangerous. I knew that name. Years ago. He did some work for certain people. Good work. Honest work, in a business that rarely sees honesty. I didn't know what to say. My father had never talked much about his consulting clients, had always kept his work separate from his family. But now, standing here, I wondered what secrets he'd kept. I'll get those drinks, I managed, and this time he let me go. I practically ran to the bar, my heart hammering so hard I thought it might burst. Marcus grabbed my arm as I approached. What did you say to him? His fingers dug into my skin. Sophia, what did you... I just answered his question. My hands shook as I pulled away. Marco, who is he? Marcus looked at me like I'd grown a second head. You really don't know. Know what? He glanced toward table 7, then back at me, his face pale. That's Dante Moretti. He owns half of New York. The other half is too afraid of him to admit he owns that too. The name hit me like a physical blow. Even I, in my small, sheltered world, had heard whispers of the Moretti family. They were old money and new power, the kind of organization that made the news when someone was found floating in the East River. Oh God, my legs went weak. Oh God, Marco, I told him... I couldn't even finish the sentence. I'd lectured a Mafia boss about business strategy. I'd practically given him advice on how to handle his enemies. I was dead. I was absolutely dead. What did you tell him? Marco hissed. But before I could answer, the sommelier arrived with the Barolo, his hand steady despite his obvious nervousness, and my coffee. With, I noticed with a sick twist in my stomach, lots of sugar. I loaded everything onto a tray, my hands trembling so badly that liquid sloshed over the rim of one wineglass. I used a napkin to wipe it clean, took a deep breath, and walked back to table 7. As I approached, I caught the tail end of a heated discussion in Italian. Dante Moretti's voice was low and firm, his companions clearly arguing against something. But when I arrived, silence fell instantly. I set down the wine glasses with as much grace as I could muster, then placed the coffee in front of the empty seat across from Dante Moretti. I'm sorry, I said quietly. I assumed. You assumed correctly. He gestured to the seat. Sit. Every alarm bell in my head went off at once. Sir, I can't. I'm working. And my manager will not say a word. His eyes never left my face. Sit, Sophia Russo. I want to discuss your financial advice. This was wrong. Everything about this was wrong, but saying no to Dante Moretti wasn't an option. I slid into the booth, the leather cold against my legs, this close. I could see details I'd missed before, the slight silver at his temples, the thin white scar along his jaw. the way his hands, for all their elegance, bore the calluses of someone who knew violence intimately. "You said something interesting," he began, his voice conversational but his eyes sharp. "About finding the gap in the market. About making competition irrelevant rather than destroying it outright." I wrapped my hands around the coffee cup, grateful for something to hold on to. "It was just a thought. I don't know anything about your actual business." "No," he agreed. "You don't, but sometimes the clearest perspective comes from outside, from someone who isn't entrenched in traditional methods." One of his men cleared his throat. "Boss, perhaps this conversation should wait until—" Dante raised one finger, just one. But it was enough. The man fell silent immediately. "Tell me more about your father's work, Sophia." It wasn't a request. "There's not much to tell. He worked with small businesses mostly. Restaurants, shops. Helped them manage their finances, streamline their operations." I took a sip of coffee, buying time. "He always said that every business, no matter how big or small, operates on the same basic principles. Supply and demand, risk and reward, trust and reputation." "Trust and reputation," Dante repeated softly. "Yes, those are crucial commodities in my world." He fell silent, studying me with an intensity that made my skin feel too tight. I forced myself to meet his gaze, to not look away like a frightened rabbit, even though everything in me screamed to run. "I'm going to make you an offer, Sophia Russo." My blood turned to ice. You need money. I need perspective. You have an education rotting away while you serve drinks to people who don't see you. I have resources that could help you finish that degree. In exchange, you work for me, consultant, advisor, whatever title makes you comfortable. I can't. The words burst out of me. "Mr. Moretti, I appreciate the offer, but I can't work for someone like you. I don't know anything about what you do, and I don't want to know. I just want to save enough money to go back to school and live in that one-bedroom apartment in Brownsville where the locks don't work and your neighbor deals drugs through a hole in the wall." I went very still. "How do you know where I live?" His smile was thin. "I know everything about everyone in my city, Sophia. It's how I've survived this long, which is why I know that you walk home alone at midnight 3 nights a week, that you've been eating ramen for dinner because you can't afford anything else, and that you're exactly 2 months behind on your father's medical bills." Horror and anger warred in my chest. "You've been watching me? Information is currency." He shrugged, unconcerned by my obvious distress. "And you, Sophia Russo, are far more interesting than you realize. Your father did work for my father years ago. Good, honest work. He never asked questions, never tried to leverage his knowledge. When my father died, your father sent flowers. Not many people dared to show that kind of respect. I hadn't known. Dad had never mentioned any of this." "So yes," Dante continued, "I've been aware of Antonio Russo's daughter. And when I heard you'd taken a job here at my restaurant, I was curious." "This is your restaurant?" "I own many things, Sophia. This is just one of them." He leaned forward, his cologne washing over me. "And now I'm offering you a chance to own something too. Security, education, a future that doesn't involve worn-out shoes and men who don't see you." "And what would you own?" I shot back, surprising myself with my boldness. "What would you get out of this arrangement?" For the first time, something like approval flickered across his face. Honesty, fresh perspective. Someone who isn't afraid to tell me when I'm wrong, and Sophia, based on this conversation, I believe you would be brave enough to do exactly that. He paused. "And perhaps a chance to repay a debt to a good man who showed my family respect when few others did." It was a trap. It had to be. Men like Dante Moretti didn't make offers out of kindness or sentimentality. There was always an angle, always a price. But God help me. I was drowning in debt and desperation, and he was offering me a life raft. "I need to think about it," I whispered. "Of course." He reached into his jacket. I flinched involuntarily, and shame burned through me when I realized what I'd thought he was reaching for, and pulled out a business card. Heavy cardstock, simple black text, just a name and a phone number. "You have 3 days. Call me with your answer. I took the card with numb fingers, the paper feeling like it weighed 1,000 pounds. And Sophia? His voice dropped lower, more intimate. Don't run. Don't try to disappear. It won't work, and it will only make things complicated. It wasn't a threat. Not exactly. But the implication was clear. I nodded, not trusting my voice, and stood on shaking legs. As I walked away, I could feel his eyes on me, heavy as a physical touch. I made it to the bathroom before my legs gave out completely. I sat on the closed toilet lid, my head in my hands, trying to process what had just happened. 3 days. I had 3 days to decide if I was going to sell my soul to the devil, or if, maybe, I already had. I didn't sleep that night. The business card sat on my nightstand like a coiled snake, innocent white cardstock that somehow radiated menace in the darkness of my studio apartment. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Dante Moretti's face. Those black eyes that seemed to see straight through me, that thin smile that promised both salvation and damnation. 3 days. The morning light filtering through my threadbare curtains felt like an accusation. I'd called in sick to the restaurant, unable to face the gossip and questions that would inevitably follow last night's scene. Marcus had sent me 6 increasingly frantic text messages, each one more desperate than the last. What did he say to you? Sophia, people are talking. Mr. Castellano wants to know if there's going to be trouble. Please just tell me you're okay. I didn't answer any of them. What could I possibly say? Instead, I sat at my kitchen table, a card table I'd found on the street and cleaned up, and spread out my bills. Medical debt, $47,000. Rent, 3 months behind. And my landlord had started leaving increasingly threatening notes under my door. Student loans, deferred. But the interest was compounding daily. Utilities. I'd been washing dishes in cold water for 2 weeks because I couldn't afford to fix the hot water heater. My father's life insurance had covered the funeral and nothing else. His consulting business had died with him, clients disappearing like smoke once word got out that Antonio Russo was gone. I picked up Dante's card, turning it over in my fingers. The paper was thick, expensive, quality. Just like everything else about him. You have an education rotting away while you serve drinks to people who don't see you. The words stung because they were true. I'd worked so hard for my bachelor's degree, had been accepted into one of the best master's programs in the city. Victorian literature had been my passion, my escape from a childhood spent watching my mother drink herself to death, and my father work himself into an early grave. I'd wanted to teach, to share my love of stories with students who might need them the same way I had, to prove that a girl from Brownsville could make something of herself. Instead, I was serving overpriced pasta to people who looked through me like I was furniture. My phone buzzed. Another text from Marcus, then one from an unknown number. The offer stands. 2 days remaining. DM. My hands shook as I stared at the message. He'd texted me. Dante Moretti, alleged Mafia boss, had my personal cell phone number and was texting me like we were casual acquaintances. The casual arrogance of it should have made me angry. Instead, I felt something else. Something that scared me more than his power or his reputation. Curiosity. What would it be like to work for someone like him? To have access to resources I couldn't even imagine? To finish my degree? To not wake up every morning with the weight of impossible debt crushing my chest? And what would it cost you? A voice whispered in my head. What would he expect in return? I thought of the way he'd looked at me, not with lust. Or not only lust. There had been something else in those dark eyes. Assessment. Calculation. Like I was a puzzle he wanted to solve. You're interesting, he'd said. Far more interesting than you realize. I didn't feel interesting. I felt tired and scared and backed into a corner with no good options. My phone buzzed again. This time it was my landlord. Last warning, Russo. Pay up by Friday or you're out. Friday was in 4 days. I looked at Dante's card again, then at my bills, then at the water-stained ceiling of my apartment, where a brown patch had been growing steadily larger for months. With trembling fingers, I typed out a response to Dante's message. I need to know exactly what you're offering, and what you expect in return. The reply came almost instantly, like he'd been waiting. Lunch, tomorrow, 1 p.m. I'll send a car. I can take the subway. No. That single word carried the weight of absolute authority. This was a man who didn't negotiate on matters of safety, or control. Where? I typed. The car will know. Of course it would. I spent the rest of the day in a haze of anxiety and second-guessing. What did one wear to lunch with a Mafia boss? My wardrobe consisted of my work uniform, 2 pairs of jeans, and a handful of threadbare sweaters. Nothing remotely appropriate for whatever world Dante Moretti inhabited. In the end, I settled on my only pair of black slacks and a cream-colored blouse I'd bought for my graduate school interview. Professional but not trying too hard. The kind of outfit that said I'm taking this seriously without saying I'm trying to impress you. Though, who was I kidding? Everything about this situation was designed to impress upon me exactly how much power he held and how little I had. The next morning, I stood in front of my bathroom mirror, applying makeup with shaking hands. I looked pale, shadows under my eyes from another sleepless night. My dark hair hung limp around my shoulders, and no amount of concealer could hide the stress written across my face. You don't have to do this, I told my reflection. You can still walk away, but could I? His words echoed in my memory. Don't run. Don't try to disappear. It won't work. At 12:45 p.m., a black Mercedes pulled up in front of my building. Sleek, expensive, with windows tinted so dark I couldn't see inside. A man in a black suit emerged from the driver's side. Tall, broad-shouldered, with a scar running down the left side of his face. He opened the back door and stood waiting, his expression neutral, but his eyes constantly scanning the street. My neighbors were watching. Mrs. Chen from 3B had her face pressed against her window. The kids who usually played basketball in the street had stopped their game, staring openly at the car that screamed money and danger. I took a deep breath and walked toward the Mercedes, my cheap shoes clicking against the pavement. The driver nodded once as I approached, but didn't speak. The interior of the car was like stepping into another world. Leather seats that probably cost more than my monthly rent, the scent of expensive cologne and new car smell. Classical music played softly from hidden speakers. As the door closed behind me, sealing me in, I felt the weight of my decision settle over my shoulders like a shroud. We drove through the city in silence. The driver, presumably one of Dante's security team, kept his eyes on the road, his movements precise and professional. Occasionally, he spoke into an earpiece in Italian, his tone clipped and efficient. I watched the streets change as we left Brooklyn behind, crossing into Manhattan, moving uptown into neighborhoods I'd only ever seen in movies. The buildings grew taller, the people better dressed, the very air seeming to shimmer with wealth and power. Finally, we pulled up in front of a restaurant I recognized from the society pages, Il Giardino Segreto, the secret garden. You couldn't get a reservation there unless you knew someone, and knowing someone meant having the kind of connections that came with old money or dangerous friends. Or both. The driver opened my door, and I stepped out onto the sidewalk, feeling completely out of place in my discount store clothes. But before I could spiral into self-consciousness, another man appeared. Older, distinguished, in a perfectly tailored suit. "Miss Russo," he said with a slight Italian accent. "Mr. Moretti is expecting you. Please, follow me." The restaurant was beautiful in the way that only truly expensive things can be. Understated elegance that whispered rather than shouted its worth. Fresh flowers on every table, artwork that looked original, waiters who moved like dancers. We bypassed the main dining room entirely, moving through a door marked "Private" and down a hallway lined with photographs of Italy. The Amalfi Coast, Tuscan vineyards, Roman architecture at sunset. At the end of the hall was another door. The man knocked twice, then opened it without waiting for a response. The private dining room beyond was intimate, with space for perhaps 6 people maximum, but only one table was set, positioned near floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked a small garden, a genuine secret garden in the heart of Manhattan. And at that table sat Dante Moretti. He stood as I entered, and I was struck again by his presence. In the restaurant 2 nights ago, surrounded by his men and the trappings of power, he'd been intimidating. Here, in the soft afternoon light, he was something else entirely, dangerous, magnetic, and far too handsome for my peace of mind. "Sophia." He gestured to the chair across from him. "Thank you for coming. Did I have a choice?" The words slipped out before I could stop them, sharp and defensive. His lips curved into that almost smile. "You always have a choice," the though I admit some choices are easier than others. I sat, hyper-aware of his eyes following my every movement. A waiter appeared instantly, pouring water and wine without being asked, then disappearing just as quickly. "I took the liberty of ordering for us," Dante said, his tone making it clear this wasn't an apology. "The chef here is Sicilian. He makes pasta the way my grandmother used to." "You had a grandmother who cooked?" I couldn't help the surprise in my voice. His expression shifted, something almost fond crossing his features. "Everyone has a grandmother, Sophia. Even men like me." He paused, then added quietly, "She died when I was 12, insisted on cooking Sunday dinner until the very end, even when she could barely stand." The glimpse of humanity caught me off guard. It was easier to think of him as a monster, as something other than human, but this memory of a grandmother who cooked even when dying, was devastatingly human. "I'm sorry," I said, and meant it. "Don't be. She lived well and died surrounded by family. There are worse endings." His eyes locked with mine. "Your father wasn't so lucky." The change in topic was deliberate, I realized. A reminder of why I was here, of what connected us beyond this strange negotiation. "No," I agreed quietly. "He died alone in a hospital room at 3 a.m. I was at work. I didn't make it in time." Dante's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "I read the report. Pancreatic cancer. Stage 4 by the time they caught it." "You read a report about my father's death?" The words came out sharper than intended, anger flaring hot in my chest. "I read reports about everything that concerns me. Your father's work for my family made him, and by extension you, a matter of concern." He leaned forward slightly. "But if you're asking whether I had someone dig into your personal tragedy for leverage, the answer is no. I already knew. I sent flowers to the funeral." I blinked, memories surfacing. There had been flowers. An enormous arrangement of white lilies with no card, just a single word. Rispetto. Respect. That was you? That was me. He picked up his wine glass, studying the deep red liquid. "Your father was a good man in a world that doesn't reward goodness. He had opportunities to betray confidences, to sell information to my family's enemies. He never did. That kind of integrity is rare, worth remembering." The food arrived then. Homemade pasta with a simple tomato sauce, crusty bread, a salad of bitter greens. It smelled like heaven and looked nothing like the pretentious dishes served in the main dining room. "Eat," Dante commanded gently. "Then we'll talk business." The pasta was perfect, al dente, the sauce rich with the sweetness of San Marzano tomatoes and fresh basil. I hadn't realized how hungry I was until the first bite hit my tongue, and then I had to force myself to eat slowly, to not shovel food into my mouth like a starving animal. Dante watched me with those dark, unreadable eyes, eating his own meal with the casual elegance of someone who'd never had to worry about where his next meal would come from. "You like it?" he observed. Not a question. "It's wonderful," I admitted. "I haven't had real Italian food since—" I trailed off, the memory suddenly painful. My father used to make Sunday dinner. Nothing fancy, but he'd learned from his mother. She came over from Sicily in the 50s. "What did he make?" The question surprised me with its genuine interest. "Braciole. He'd spend hours on the sauce, rolling the meat just so. Said it wasn't about the recipe, but about the patience." I smiled despite myself. I never learned. I kept saying I'd have him teach me after I finished school. But there was no after, Dante said quietly. "No, there wasn't." We ate in silence for a few moments, and I found myself relaxing slightly. This felt almost normal. 2 people sharing a meal, talking about family and food. If I ignored the security outside the door, the obvious wealth surrounding us, the fact that I was having lunch with one of the most dangerous men in New York, it could have been pleasant. But I couldn't ignore those things. And Dante Moretti wasn't about to let me forget them. He set down his fork, dabbed his mouth with a linen napkin, and leaned back in his chair. The shift in his posture was subtle, but unmistakable, business mode. "Let me be very clear about what I'm offering you, Sophia." His voice was calm, measured, the voice of a man used to negotiating deals worth millions. I want you to work as a financial consultant for my legitimate businesses. I own restaurants, real estate holdings, construction companies, import-export operations. All legal, all requiring the kind of analysis and strategic planning your father specialized in. Legitimate businesses, I repeated, the skepticism clear in my voice. His mouth curved. You don't believe me. I believe that men in your position don't usually need to send armed guards to pick up their financial consultants. Touché. He inclined his head slightly, acknowledging the point. Let me rephrase. I own many businesses. Some of them are entirely legitimate and could benefit from fresh perspective. Those are the businesses you would work with. The rest, he shrugged. You would have no contact with, no knowledge of, and no responsibility for. Plausible deniability, protection, he corrected. For both of us, what you don't know can't hurt you, or be used against you. I took a sip of water, buying time to think. And the pay? $60,000 a year to start. Health insurance. And I'll pay off your father's medical debt in full. I nearly choked on my water. $60,000 was more than I'd make in 3 years serving tables. And the medical debt. God, that alone was worth more than I could imagine. That's too much, I said automatically. For basic financial consulting, that's market rate for someone with your education and your father's reputation. Dante interrupted smoothly. And before you argue, understand that I'm not being generous. I'm being practical. Underpaid employees become resentful. Resentful employees become security risks. I pay well because loyalty is expensive, and betrayal is more expensive still. The casual way he spoke about loyalty and betrayal sent a chill down my spine. This was a man who'd clearly dealt with both. What about school? I asked. You mentioned helping me finish my degree. You'll work 20 hours a week, flexible schedule around your classes. When you graduate with your master's, we'll renegotiate your salary and position. He paused. Assuming you want to continue working for me. It was almost too good to be true, which meant it probably was. What's the catch? I asked bluntly. There's always a catch. Something flickered in his eyes, approval maybe. The catch is that you work for me, Sophia. That means you represent my interests. You don't discuss my business with anyone outside my organization. You don't ask questions about things that don't concern you. And you understand that once you're in... He leaned forward, his voice dropping lower. It's very difficult to get out. There it was. The trap I'd been waiting for. You're asking me to sell my soul, I said quietly. I'm asking you to sell your skills, he corrected. Your soul is your own. What you do with it is your choice. He held my gaze. But let's be honest about your options. You can keep serving tables, falling further into debt, watching your dreams die slowly. Or you can take what I'm offering, financial security, education, a future. Under your control, under my protection, he said. There's a difference. Is there? Yes. The single word was firm, absolute. Control is about power over someone. Protection is about keeping them safe from those who would use power against them. He paused. Your father understood that distinction. It's why he worked for my family without ever becoming part of my family. I wanted to argue, to point out all the ways this was manipulation dressed up as opportunity. But the truth was, he was right about my options. I was drowning, and he was offering me a lifeline. The fact that the lifeline came with strings attached didn't make it any less real. I need time to think, I said finally. You have until tomorrow night. After that, the offer expires. His tone made it clear this wasn't negotiable. I'm a patient man, Sophia, but I'm also a busy one. I can't wait indefinitely for you to decide if you want to save yourself. The waiter returned with espresso and small pastries, sfogliatelle, the crispy layered shells filled with sweet ricotta that my grandmother used to make. Another calculated move, I realized. Everything about this lunch was designed to make me comfortable, to remind me of family and tradition, to blur the lines between business and personal. And damn him, it was working. Can I ask you something? I ventured, picking up the tiny espresso cup. You can ask. Whether I answer is another matter. Why me? Really? There are plenty of financial consultants in New York. People with more experience, better credentials. Why go to all this trouble for a waitress with a half-finished degree? Dante was quiet for a long moment, his fingers drumming once on the table, that heavy gold ring catching the light again. I noticed details I'd missed before. The ring bore an engraved crest, old and worn with time. Because everyone else lies to me, he said finally, his voice low. They tell me what they think I want to hear. They're afraid. And fear makes people stupid. He met my eyes. But you, when I asked you about my competition problem, you didn't try to flatter me or agree with whatever violent solution you thought I wanted. You gave me an honest answer, a smart answer. That's rare. Valuable. So this is about ego? You want someone who'll tell you the truth? His smile was sharp. This is about survival. An organization that only hears yes becomes blind. Blind organizations die. He leaned back. Your father told my father no once. Did you know that? I shook my head. My father wanted to invest in a restaurant chain. Your father looked at the numbers and said it was a bad investment, that the market was oversaturated. My father was furious. Insisted he do it anyway. Dante's expression was distant, remembering. The chain went bankrupt within 2 years. Cost my father millions. And you know what he said? What? I should have listened to Antonio. He never forgot that. And when he needed advice after that, he always called your father first. Dante's eyes refocused on me. I want what my father had, someone who isn't afraid to tell me when I'm wrong. Someone who looks at problems differently than I do. It was the most honest thing he'd said since I'd arrived, and it terrified me because it made sense. Because it made him seem human rather than monstrous. Because it made this whole situation feel less like a trap and more like an actual opportunity. I should go, I said, standing abruptly. I need to think. Dante stood as well, moving around the table with fluid grace. He was close now, close enough that I could smell his cologne again, could see the silver threading through his dark hair at the temples. Think carefully, Sophia, he said softly. But don't think too long. The world doesn't wait for us to be ready. It moves, and we either move with it or get crushed beneath it. He pulled something from his jacket pocket. An envelope, thick and cream-colored. Your father's medical bills, paid in full. Regardless of your answer tomorrow. I stared at the envelope like it might bite me. I can't accept that. Not if I'm not going to work for you. Consider it a gift. Respect for your father's memory. He pressed it into my hands. No strings, no obligations. Just one less burden for you to carry. The envelope felt heavy, weighted with implications I couldn't begin to understand. This wasn't generosity. Men like Dante Moretti didn't do things without reason. But God, the thought of being free from that debt, of not waking up every morning to collection calls and threatening letters. Thank you, I whispered, hating how much I meant it. His hand came up, and I flinched involuntarily, but he only tucked a strand of hair behind my ear, his touch surprisingly gentle. Go home, Sophia. Think about what you want your life to look like in 5 years, then call me with your answer. The driver was waiting outside, standing beside the Mercedes like a silent sentinel. The ride back to Brooklyn passed in a blur, my mind spinning with everything Dante had said, everything he'd offered, everything I stood to gain or lose. When I finally climbed the stairs to my apartment, I felt exhausted, wrung out, like I'd just survived an interrogation rather than a lunch. I opened the envelope. Inside were receipts marked paid in full for every medical bill. $47,000 gone with the stroke of a pen, and a handwritten note in elegant script. Your father would want you to be free. The choice is yours. DM. I sat on my second-hand couch and cried. I called him the next morning. The decision had come to me at 3 a.m., staring at my water-stained ceiling while sirens wailed somewhere in the distance, and my neighbor's bass thumped through the thin walls. I'd thought about my father, about the dreams he'd had for me, about the last conversation we'd had in that sterile hospital room. Don't waste your life being afraid, Soph, he'd whispered, his hand cold in mine. Take chances. Live big. This wasn't exactly what he'd meant, but it was a chance. and God knew my current life wasn't living big. It was barely living at all. Dante answered on the first ring, his voice alert despite the early hour. Sophia. I'll do it, I said before I could change my mind. I'll work for you. But I have conditions. A pause. Then, I'm listening. I want everything in writing. Contract, salary, job description. All of it legal and official. My voice was steadier than I felt. And I want to start with a 6-month trial period. If it's not working out, either of us can walk away. No. The flat refusal caught me off guard. What do you mean, no? I mean, contracts can be subpoenaed. Written agreements become evidence. In my world, Sophia, a handshake is worth more than 1,000 pages of legal documents. His voice was firm, but not unkind. As for walking away, once you're in, you're in. But I can promise you this. As long as you're loyal to me, I'll be loyal to you. That's worth more than any contract. It should have been a red flag. It should have sent me running. But something in his voice, that absolute certainty, that old world code of honor, made me believe him. Okay, I heard myself say. When do I start? Today. I'm sending a car at 10. Bring whatever you need for the next week. A week? I thought. You'll be staying at one of my properties while we get you situated. Safer that way. Before I could protest, he added, separate quarters, full privacy. But I need you close while you're learning the business. Every instinct screamed that this was moving too fast, that I was losing control of the situation. But what control had I ever really had? Fine. 10 o'clock. Sophia? His voice softened slightly. You made the right choice. I wasn't sure about that, but I'd made a choice, and that was something. The black Mercedes arrived precisely at 10, this time driven by a different man, younger, with kind eyes and a professional demeanor that somehow felt less threatening than the scarred driver from yesterday. Miss Russo, I'm Marco. I'll be your primary driver while you're working for Mr. Moretti. He took my battered duffel bag, everything I owned fit into one bag, which was depressing, and held open the car door. Mr. Moretti asked me to assure you that you're safe. Nothing will happen to you under our protection. It was meant to be comforting. Instead, it reminded me that I was now someone who needed protection. We drove north, out of Brooklyn, through Manhattan and into Westchester County. The landscape changed gradually. Concrete giving way to trees, cramped buildings replaced by sprawling estates hidden behind stone walls and iron gates. Finally, we turned onto a private road that wound through manicured grounds before ending at a house that made my breath catch. It wasn't a house. It was a mansion. All stone and glass, modern architecture blending seamlessly with classical Italian design. Gardens stretched in every direction, and I could see a pool glittering in the distance. This is where I'm staying? My voice came out as a squeak. Marco smiled. The guest house, actually. This is Mr. Moretti's private residence. Of course it was. The guest house turned out to be a small cottage near the back of the property. Small, being relative, since it was still bigger than any apartment I'd ever lived in. 2 bedrooms, a full kitchen, a living room with windows overlooking a rose garden. Mr. Moretti will send for you this afternoon, Marco said, setting my bag inside. Make yourself comfortable. If you need anything, there's a phone in the kitchen. Just dial 0. Then I was alone. I spent the next hour exploring the space, running my fingers over furniture that was worth more than everything I'd ever owned combined. The bathroom had a tub big enough to swim in, heated floors, and about a dozen towels so soft they felt like clouds. The closet held clothes, my size exactly. I pulled out a simple black dress, well made but professional. Then a pair of slacks and several blouses, all expensive, all perfect, all somehow exactly my style. He'd planned this. Down to the last detail, Dante Moretti had planned my life. The thought should have terrified me. Instead, I felt something else. A strange mixture of relief and resentment. Relief that someone was taking care of things, making decisions. Resentment that I'd given up the right to make those decisions myself. At 2 o'clock, Marco returned to escort me to the main house. If the exterior was impressive, the interior was breathtaking. Marble floors, vaulted ceilings, artwork that looked like it belonged in museums. But despite the obvious wealth, there was a warmth to the space. Family photographs on the mantle, fresh flowers in every room, signs of actual life rather than just expensive decoration. Marco led me to a study on the second floor, knocked twice, and opened the door. Dante sat behind a massive mahogany desk. Surrounded by computer monitors and stacks of files, he'd shed his suit jacket, working in shirt sleeves that revealed forearms corded with muscle. Reading glasses perched on his nose, making him look almost scholarly. He glanced up as I entered, and something shifted in his expression. Not quite a smile, but close. "Sophia. Good, sit." He gestured to a chair across from his desk, then turned to Marco. "We're not to be disturbed. Station yourself outside." Marco nodded and left, closing the door behind him. I sat, hyper-aware of how out of place I looked in this room full of expensive things and dangerous secrets. Dante removed his glasses, setting them aside, and studied me for a long moment. "How are you settling in? The cottage is beautiful. The clothes were necessary. You'll be meeting with my business associates, attending meetings. You need to look the part." He said it matter-of-factly, without judgment. "Consider it a uniform, a very expensive uniform. I take care of what's mine, Sophia." The possessive language wasn't lost on me, but before I could react, he continued. "Now, let's discuss what you'll actually be doing." He spent the next 2 hours walking me through his legitimate businesses, and there were more than I'd expected. Restaurants throughout the tri-state area, a construction company that specialized in historic renovations, import businesses bringing in Italian wines and olive oil, several real estate holdings. "The construction company is losing money," he said, pulling up spreadsheets on one monitor. "Has been for 6 months. My accountant says it's normal market fluctuation, but my instinct says something's wrong." I leaned forward, studying the numbers. Even with my limited experience, I could see the problem. Your materials costs have increased 40%, but your billing hasn't changed proportionally. Someone's either stealing from you, or you have a supplier charging inflated prices. Dante's eyes narrowed. "Explain." I pulled the keyboard toward me, highlighting rows of data. "See here? Same materials, same quantities, but the cost jumped significantly starting in March. Either your supplier raised prices and didn't tell you, or someone's skimming money by inflating invoices." "Who's the supplier?" I clicked through to another sheet. "Lombardi Building Materials." Something dangerous flashed across Dante's face. "Lombardi." The name came out like a curse. "Paolo Lombardi runs that company. He's been a business partner for 15 years. Then either he's cheating you, or someone in his organization is." I met his eyes. "This is what you wanted, right? Honest analysis." For a moment, I thought I'd overstepped. His jaw was tight, his hands fisted on the desk. Then he exhaled slowly and nodded. "Yes, this is exactly what I wanted." He stood, pacing to the window. "Paolo and I grew up together. Our fathers did business. I trusted him. Maybe you still can. Maybe he doesn't know." I tried to keep my voice neutral, "But you need to find out." He turned back to me, and the look in his eyes made my breath catch. It wasn't anger. It was something more complex, respect mixed with something darker, something almost predatory. "You're good at this," he said quietly. "Better than you realize. I just read numbers. My father taught me." "Your father taught you well." He returned to his desk, but instead of sitting, he leaned against it, close enough that I could smell his cologne. "I'm going to tell you something, Sophia, because you need to understand the world you've entered. Paolo Lombardi isn't just a business partner. He's connected. Not to my family specifically, but to others. If he's stealing from me, it's not a simple matter of firing a supplier. What does that mean? It means there could be consequences. Politics, alliances that get tested." His voice was matter-of-fact, discussing potential violence like it was a weather forecast. "Which is why I need you to be very sure about this analysis, because once I act on it, there's no going back." The weight of responsibility settled over me like a lead blanket. This wasn't just consulting. This was potentially triggering events I couldn't begin to understand, couldn't control. "I'm sure about the numbers," I said carefully. "What you do with that information is your decision." "No." He leaned closer, and I caught my breath. "It's our decision now. You work for me, Sophia. That means we're partners in this. I need to know I can trust your judgment. Not just your math skills, your judgment. I barely know you, I whispered. How can you trust me with something this important? Because your father was trustworthy. Because you walked away from easy money when you could have lied to me at the restaurant. Because everything I've learned about you says you're honest. He paused. And because sometimes you have to take a leap of faith. His hand came up, cupping my cheek with surprising gentleness. His palm was warm, calloused, the touch sending electricity through my skin. I'm taking a chance on you, Sophia Russo. Don't make me regret it. Then he stepped back, the moment broken, all business again. I want you to dig deeper into the Lombardi account. Every invoice, every transaction for the past year. Find me proof of exactly what's happening and who's responsible. And then, his smile was cold, then I'll handle it. That's my job, not yours. I spent the rest of the afternoon buried in financial records, building a timeline of the theft. Because it was theft, I was certain now. Someone at Lombardi Building Materials had been systematically inflating invoices, skimming money off the top, and betting that no one would notice in the chaos of a busy construction company. They'd been right. Until now. By the time Marco came to escort me back to the cottage, I had a file 3 inches thick documenting the fraud, nearly $100,000 over 6 months. Dante took the file without comment, his expression unreadable. Get some rest, he said. Tomorrow, we're going to Lombardi's office. You're coming with me. Why? You have the evidence. Because I want Paolo to see who found him out. I want him to know that his old friend Dante now has someone smart enough to catch him. His eyes glittered dangerously, and I want you to see what happens when people betray my trust. It was a warning and a lesson all in one. That night, alone in the cottage, I lay awake wondering what I'd gotten myself into. The drive to Lombardi Building Materials felt like a funeral procession. 2 black SUVs flanked our Mercedes, all 3 vehicles moving in perfect formation through morning traffic. Dante sat beside me in the back seat, his presence filling the space with barely contained tension. He'd said nothing since we'd left the estate, his silence more terrifying than any threat. I clutched the file folder in my lap, my palms sweating, despite the car's climate control. When we get there, Dante said suddenly, his voice cutting through the quiet, you'll present your findings, calmly, professionally. No matter what happens, you keep your composure. What's going to happen? His jaw tightened. That depends on Paolo. The building supply company was housed in a warehouse in Queens, a sprawling complex of loading docks and storage facilities. We pulled up to the main office, and I noticed immediately that the parking lot had cleared. The workers who should have been loading trucks had vanished. They'd been warned we were coming. Dante's security moved first, sweeping the building before signaling the all clear. Only then did Dante help me out of the car, his hand firm on my elbow. Stay close, he murmured. And remember, you're under my protection. No one will touch you. Paolo Lombardi waited in his office, a heavy-set man in his 60s with silver hair and expensive clothes that couldn't hide the nervousness in his eyes. He stood as we entered, his smile strained. Dante, my friend, this is unexpected. If you'd called ahead, we're not friends anymore, Paolo. Dante's voice was ice. Sit down. The older man's face paled, but he obeyed, sinking into his chair like his legs had given out. Dante gestured to me. This is Sophia Russo. She's been reviewing my company's finances. Sophia, please share what you found. My mouth was dry, but I opened the folder with steady hands. Over the past 6 months, invoices from Lombardi Building Materials to Moretti Construction have shown a 40% increase in material costs. However, market prices for those same materials have remained stable. I laid out spreadsheets on Paolo's desk, my finger tracing the highlighted rows. Someone has been adding unauthorized charges to each invoice. The total theft amounts to approximately $97,000. Paolo's eyes widened. Theft? Dante, I would never. I'm not finished. I pulled out another document. The fraudulent charges all trace back to a single account manager, Vincent Calabresi. He's been processing the invoices and presumably pocketing the difference. For a moment, there was absolute silence. Then Paolo's face crumpled. Vincent. Dio mio, Vincent is my nephew, my sister's boy. He looked at Dante with desperate eyes. I didn't know. I swear on my mother's grave I didn't know. Dante said nothing, his expression carved from stone. Please, Dante. We grew up together. Our fathers are dead, Paulo, and they'd be ashamed of what's happened here. Dante leaned forward, his voice deadly quiet. You let family steal from me. Whether you knew or not, that's a failure of leadership, of loyalty. I'll pay back every penny. I'll fire Vincent. You'll do more than that. Dante straightened. Vincent will return the money within 48 hours. All of it, plus 50% interest. And he'll leave New York. Permanently. If I see him in my city again, there will be consequences. Paulo nodded frantically. Yes, of course, I'll make sure. I'm not finished. The steel in Dante's voice made everyone in the room flinch. For the next year, you'll reduce your prices to me by 20%. Call it restitution for my time and trouble. After that, we'll renegotiate our arrangement based on whether you've proven yourself trustworthy again. It was a punishment, but also mercy. Paulo seemed to recognize that, relief washing over his features. Thank you, Dante. Thank you. I won't let you down again. Dante turned to leave, then paused. And Paulo? If I find out you knew about this and lied to me today, you won't get a second chance. Am I clear? Crystal clear. I swear. I had no idea. Outside, I gulped in fresh air, my hands trembling with the aftermath of adrenaline. I'd expected violence, or at least the threat of it. Instead, I'd witnessed something more complex. Justice, certainly, but also pragmatism. Dante had protected his interests without destroying a decades-long relationship. You handled that well, Dante said as we drove away. No hesitation, no fear. I was terrified, I admitted. Good. Fear keeps you sharp. He glanced at me. But you didn't let it control you. That's the difference between surviving in this world and drowning in it. Over the next 3 months, I settled into a routine I never could have imagined. My days were split between classes. I'd re-enrolled in my graduate program and work for Dante's organization. I analyzed financial reports, identified inefficiencies, proposed strategies for expansion and consolidation. And slowly, terrifyingly, I became good at it. Dante was a demanding boss, but a fair one. He listened to my recommendations, challenged my assumptions, pushed me to think strategically rather than just analytically. Our meetings evolved from tense confrontations to genuine collaborations. But there was something else happening too. Something I tried desperately to ignore, the way his eyes followed me when I entered a room. The unnecessary touches, a hand on the small of my back, fingers brushing mine when passing documents, the conversations that stretched late into the evening, moving from business to personal, from professional to intimate. I told myself it was nothing. He was my boss. This was just a job. But I was lying to myself. It came to a head on a cold November evening. I'd been working late in his study, finishing an analysis of a potential restaurant acquisition. Dante had been on the phone, speaking rapid Italian to someone in Sicily, his voice rising and falling with intensity. When he finally hung up, the silence felt heavy. You should eat something, he said, loosening his tie. You've been working for 6 hours straight. I'm almost done. Sophia. He crossed to where I sat, pulling my chair away from the desk with gentle force. When was the last time you had a real meal? Not coffee and whatever Marco brought you. I couldn't remember. I'm fine. You're exhausted. His hands settled on my shoulders, and I felt the warmth of them through my blouse. You push yourself too hard, says the man who works 18-hour days. His laugh was low, rumbling through his chest. Fair point. But his hands didn't move. Instead, his thumbs began tracing small circles against my shoulders, working at the knots of tension there. I should have moved away, should have maintained professional boundaries. But God, it felt too good, and I was so tired of being strong, of being careful. Dante, I whispered. A warning or a plea, I wasn't sure which. I know. His voice was rough. I know this is complicated. I know I'm your boss. I know there's a power imbalance that makes this impossible. Then why? Because I can't stop thinking about you. The confession came out harsh, almost angry. Since that first night in the restaurant, when you looked at me like I was just a man asking a question instead of something to fear, you've been in my head, Sophia, distracting me, making me question things I've always been certain about. My heart hammered against my ribs. What things? His hand slid from my shoulders to my arms, turning my chair so I faced him. He crouched down, putting us at eye level, his dark eyes burning with intensity. Whether power is enough, whether I want to spend the rest of my life alone in this house, surrounded by people who fear me rather than know me. He reached up, cupping my face with both hands. Whether maybe, just maybe, your father sent you to me for a reason. My father's dead, I whispered. I know. But if he were alive, if he could see you now, would he be proud? Or would he hate me for bringing you into this world? The question caught me off guard with its vulnerability. This was Dante Moretti stripped of his armor, asking for something he'd probably never asked for before. Forgiveness, permission, understanding. He'd be proud, I said truthfully. He always said I was stronger than I believed, that I just needed someone to see it in me. I covered his hands with mine. You see it. Even when I don't. I see everything about you, Sophia. Your strength, your intelligence, the way you bite your lip when you're concentrating, the way you argue with me when you think I'm wrong, the way you've transformed from that scared girl in the restaurant into someone formidable. I'm still scared, I admitted. Good. So am I. He leaned closer, his forehead resting against mine. This terrifies me, what I feel for you, what it means, the vulnerability. Then maybe we shouldn't. Too late. His lips brushed mine, soft and tentative. I'm already in too deep. The kiss was nothing like I'd imagined. Not forceful or demanding, but gentle, almost reverent, like I was something precious that might shatter if handled too roughly. When we finally pulled apart, we were both breathing hard. This changes everything, I said. I know. Your organization, the people who work for you, they'll see it as weakness. Let them try. The steel returned to his voice. You're mine to protect now, Sophia. Mine to care for. And anyone who has a problem with that will answer to me. The possessiveness should have bothered me. A year ago, it would have sent me running. But I understood now what he meant. In Dante's world, protection and possession were intertwined. To claim me was to shield me from harm. What happens now? I asked. Now? His smile was almost boyish. Now I take you to dinner. A real date, not a business meeting. And we figure out how to navigate this like two adults who actually like each other. I'm still your employee. Then I'll give you a raise. He pulled me to my feet. And before you argue about ethics, Sophia, I own the company. I make the rules. And my rule is that I'm allowed to court the brilliant, beautiful woman who saved my construction business and called me out on my bullshit. I couldn't help laughing. Court? Who says court anymore? I do. Because you deserve courting. Romance. All the things women want and men like me rarely provide. His expression turned serious. I can't promise you a normal life. There will always be danger. Always be complications. But I can promise you honesty, loyalty. Everything I have. Everything I am. It's yours if you want it. It was the most honest proposal. Of what? I wasn't sure yet. I'd ever heard. Okay, I whispered. Okay, take me to dinner, Dante Moretti. Let's see where this goes. His smile could have lit up the entire city. 6 months later, I defended my master's thesis on Victorian literature's influence on modern romance narratives. Dante sat in the back row, looking completely out of place in his expensive suit among the academics and students, but refusing to miss it. When I finished, when the committee congratulated me on an excellent defense, I looked back and found him watching me with naked pride. That night, he proposed. Actually proposed, with a ring that had belonged to his grandmother, the one who'd cooked Sunday dinners until she couldn't stand. Marry me, he said. No preamble, no flowery speech, not because I own you or control you, but because I love you, because you make me better, because I want to spend the rest of my life being challenged and questioned and occasionally lectured about financial inefficiency. I laughed through tears. That's the worst proposal I've ever heard. Then let me try again. He pulled me close, his voice soft. Sophia Russo, you walked into my life by accident and became my purpose. You see me, really see me, and you don't flinch. You argue with me when I'm wrong and support me when I'm right. You're brilliant and brave, and everything I never knew I needed. Please, for the love of God, say you'll marry me. Yes, I whispered. Yes, I'll marry you. We married 6 months later in a small ceremony in the garden where we'd had that first lunch. No mob spectacle, no huge wedding, just family. Both his blood family and the extended family of his organization, and the few friends I'd maintained from my old life. My father wasn't there to walk me down the aisle, but I felt him anyway. Felt his approval in the warm breeze, in the scent of the roses he'd loved. Take chances, Soph. Live big. I had, and God help me. I'd never been happier. Dante wasn't perfect. His world wasn't safe or simple. There were still dangers, still complications, still moments when I questioned the life I'd chosen. But every night I came home to a man who valued my mind as much as my heart, who asked my opinion on business decisions and actually listened, who'd kept his promise of loyalty and protection. And every morning, I woke up next to someone who saw me, really saw me, and loved what he found. I'd come to that restaurant a broken, desperate girl serving drinks to people who didn't see her. I'd left as a woman who'd found her strength, her voice, and against all odds, her future. Sometimes the right choice is the terrifying one. Sometimes salvation comes from the most unexpected places. And sometimes, just sometimes, the dangerous man in the corner booth turns out to be exactly what you needed all along.